Hi there, Raimy.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you doing? Relieved it's a weekend.
Yeah, good and public holiday on Tuesday, which is nice. And then I think another short week next
Yeah,
week, which will be good.
yeah, absolutely. I've actually taken Monday off, so have a long
Yeah.
weekend, which is super lovely.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So, can you start telling us a bit about yourself and your health journey?
Yeah, sure. So first off, just thank you for having me. And
That's okay.
I want to preface by saying this is the first time I've done anything like this before, so feeling a bit anxious.
Don't be,
But
it'll be fine.
Yeah, so my name's Lisa, and I identify as living with a dynamic disability. I have multiple chronic illnesses, and I'm quite open about, what my chronic illnesses are. I live with type 1 diabetes, which I've had since I was the age of 5. And I have an autoimmune condition called Addison's disease. Which is relatively rare. And I was diagnosed with that when I was 20 years old. And yeah, essentially what that means is that my body doesn't produce cortisol, which is the stress management hormone. Um, so, yes, navigating life and its stresses can be challenging. And yeah, I also have hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's disease. So yeah, I like to call it the holy trio, and um, navigating life and work life with chronic illness can be challenging during times of flare-ups. And um, yeah, there's times where I'm less functional and um, yeah, struggle a bit to just get on with day-to-day life.
Can you run us through Addison's and Hashimoto's? Is that how you pronounce it? A bit?
Yeah,
Like, what
yeah,
are the
that's right.
symptoms? How does it affect you?
Yeah, so Hashimoto's is a thyroid condition. So essentially, it means that my body doesn't my body attacked the thyroid gland, and because it's an autoimmune condition, and so I don't produce any thyroid hormones, um, and that creates fatigue, brain fog, weight fluctuation. It also affects how your body regulates your temperature. So often I have very cold hands and feet. Um, and then Addison's disease is essentially uh, where my adrenal glands no longer produce cortisol. So I have to take steroids 3 times a day in order to replace that hormone. And it also impacts your aldosterone, which regulates your blood pressure. So I have very low blood pressure, which at times can create like extreme sort of fatigue, but also sort of fainting spells, like postural dizziness when you're standing up, a little bit similar to POTS
Mm.
syndrome in that it's very much affected by when you're standing up. Um, yeah, and essentially when my body is under any sort of physical stress, such as an infection or um, illness, I have to increase my steroid doses in order to manage that. Otherwise, I can go into what is called an adrenal crisis, which um, essentially means my blood pressure becomes dangerously low, and um, I can end up being unconscious, and it can be fatal. So yeah, that's you know, navigating physical but also emotional stress and regulating that's really important.
Isn't Hashimoto's quite rare, or am I thinking of something
So
different?
I'm not sure how rare Hashimoto's
Mm.
is. I mean, so type 1 diabetes is autoimmune too. So since I was 5, I've had one plus
Right.
autoimmune conditions. And yeah, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's at the same time as Addison's
Mm.
disease. And because Addison's disease is a lot more rare, the emphasis and the sort of medical intrigue was more, by doctors, was more placed on the Addison's,
Yeah.
and Hashimoto's was always kind of like the secondary, less
Mm.
important diagnosis, so to speak. Um, but yeah, I think the three conditions, Hashimoto's, Addison's, and type 1 diabetes, is there's a lot of research on those sort of trio, and it's called Schmidt syndrome, where
Mm.
you can have three or more autoimmune conditions that often go hand in hand.
Yeah, I think some people don't realize, when people, like a lot of people with chronic illnesses tend to have more than one. And,
Yeah,
that's when they'll be like, oh, you're faking it or you're making it up or you're exaggerating it. But a lot of those chronic illnesses are connected. EDS has like a
yeah,
billion other illnesses that it's connected to. Like you're more likely to have ADHD and autism and fibromyalgia. And I think a lot of people don't realize that they do often come together, or you're a lot more likely to have more than one.
you're so right around those conditions being often very connected, and also with mental health, like how mental health comes into navigating chronic health conditions is really something I'm quite passionate about.
What was the diagnosis process like for you?
Yeah, it's quite an intense story, actually. But yeah, my diagnosis story.
Mm.
So I'm originally from South Africa, and lived and grew up in Cape Town until I was 18. And then when I was 18, I went to the UK and did voluntary work through a program called WOOFing, which is Worldwide Organic Farming. And at the time, I only had type 1 diabetes, which was, pretty well self-managed. You have your ups and downs, but you, since I was 5, I had managed it. So I was very well versed in how to be quote unquote healthy. Um, and yeah, so I did a lot of physical work through that woofing program on farms, and probably was the first time in my life that I've ever done such intensive physical work, like pulling up trees and involved in renovations, and some quite hardcore physical labor. Um, and in that year that I did that, I started to become really symptomatic. And at the time, I just thought it was exhaustion from work and getting really tanned from being out in the elements and in the sun in Europe, because I also volunteered in Europe during the summer. And then I came back to London, and I saw a specialist for my diabetes, and I was feeling really unwell. And they sort of just said, "Oh, it's just the flu. Go home, take paracetamol. You'll be fine." Which I did for a couple of weeks, and then I um, went to sleep one night on a Friday night, and was meant to be working Saturday, Sunday um, at this guest house on a farm, and I didn't rock up to work, and because I was a volunteer and pretty new, no one sort of knew that I was a reliable worker. So it was like, oh, she just didn't rock up to work. Anyway, it turns out I was asleep, unconscious for 36 hours. And I woke up on the Sunday morning completely confused and sort of, yeah, just completely mentally drained, like struggled to sort of know where I was and what day it was. And I had woken up, and it's quite graphic, but I had woken up in my own like vomit. Um, anyway, so I decided, probably not in the most stable of mental states, to go to London to see my specialist. And I was at the time in regional Devon. And went there and a nurse saw me before the doctor's appointment, and she said, like, are you always this tanned? Like, you look really yellow and tanned, and is this normal for you? And she actually suggested to the doctor that they test for Addison's disease, and she was like a nurse in training. Um, so yeah, they tested, and it was like the results were clear as day that I had it. And then I was suddenly told that I needed to take steroids 3 times a day, every day for the rest of my life, and that would be the solution, and I would feel all right. Consequently, I kind of have understood that that's probably not the case. It's an ongoing journey to feel okay, and I've probably, since
Mm.
being diagnosed with Addison's, I've probably never felt 100%. I'm always sort of at 80, 80 to 95% on a good day. Um, and yeah, that was my diagnosis story. Um, yeah, it's probably longer than you expected.
Yeah, a bit intense. No, it's a definitely a bit intense. I mean, it's good that
Yeah,
they figured it out quite quickly. I mean, because
yeah,
it's sounding a bit extreme.
yeah,
And you currently work in the disability space, is that correct?
yeah, that's right. So, yeah, I'm very fortunate in that I was diagnosed so quickly. I know many people struggle with years and years to get a diagnosis for Addison's disease, so that I'm thankful for. And yeah, I work in the disability sector, have done for probably close to 2 years now, in Australia. And yeah, so I have worked for an NDIS provider, and previously, and I now work as a program coordinator for a non-for-profit organization that works with people with disability and employers, to ensure that Australia is building a disability confident workforce. And I really enjoy my work in the sector. It can be challenging at times, working within such a um, caring, and supportive industry, which demands a lot from you as a human.
Mm.
But yeah,
And is it kind of common that other people who work with you have disabilities or chronic illnesses, or are you kind of hanging around being the only one?
yeah, that's such a good question. So I think recently, the organization that I work for said that we have close to 40 to 50% um, of our workforce are people with disability,
Mm.
which is really wonderful,
Yeah, that's really great.
really, really good. And yeah, the place that I currently work at. It's the first time that I've ever navigated the workplace adjustments conversation. So pre-working for this organization, I'd never requested any workplace adjustments. Um, and so going through that journey has been such a wonderful learning experience for me to understand what my support needs are in the workplace, and to learn how to articulate what I need, in order
Mm.
to be my best self and in the workplace. And it's been helpful for me to sort of build on my advocacy skills, and um, yeah, and essentially, in my work, I work with people with disability to help them to understand what their needs are in the workplace. So through that, and through speaking to people with a diverse set of disabilities, both hidden and um, invisible, dynamic, and visible or physical disabilities. Working with those people has really taught me a lot about myself, and the community.
And how much of a difference has it made having, like, being able to have those adjustments at work?
Yeah, it's an ongoing journey, and it's something that I think, um, we have to always sort of revisit and revise and say, okay, is this still working as we had originally intended it? Do we need to change that adjustment? Do I need to add something? Do I no longer need that? But having those conversations, and knowing that I can, knowing that there's a policy in place that's supporting me to have that conversation, um, has been great. And like I said, I've never experienced that before in the workplace, before working for the non-for-profit that I work for now. Like I've always had to ask for things in the workplace,
Mm.
but I've never had the words, or the knowledge to back me up in those requests.
Yeah. Are you working full time?
Yeah, so I work full time,
Yeah.
which is a challenge if I'm honest. So the economy that we currently are all navigating and the cost of living increase means that I don't think I could ever work part time, just to keep a roof over my head and cover those expenses. But yeah, working full time with chronic illness is really difficult. I think I was listening to an interview with Michelle Irving, who does a lot of work in the chronic illness and um, mentorship space around people with chronic illness and working. And she said, like, I think it was her, she said that, like, working with chronic illness, you have two jobs. You have the full-time job of navigating and looking after your own health, and your full-time job. And then you also have the job of educating people about living with chronic illness. So yeah, it's full on.
Yeah. And I know you said, financially it's not really possible, but do you think you're going to be able to do that full time, like for however many more years you're doing it? Or
Yeah, it's it's such a good question, and I think it's something I think about often. Like, is this sustainable? Because I'm probably driving myself way too hard in
Mm,
in the way that I work. And I think part of what I'm doing with the Champion Health Agency, and speaking to my own lived experiences, is developing a bit of a fallback, to be able to freelance would be an amazing
mm,
thing, and sort of the dream. And so um, working on those side projects and passion projects is sort of with that in mind, that if one day I'm not able to work full time in the sector, then maybe I would be able to fall back on freelancing and work part
yeah.
time.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at too. I think I've been working full time now for 3 months, and I already know it's not going to
That's
be
sustainable.
sustainable. And I know that part of it's me because I am doing those things on the side, like this podcast.
I
But
hear
I think
you.
you kind of have to, right? Like I know it's not going to work for probably even a year. So
Yeah.
what else are you going to do?
Wow. Yeah, and it's challenging, isn't it? Because we want to be active, members of society and contributing, but we also have to do it in a way that doesn't sacrifice our own health
Yeah.
and well-being. And um, I think people with chronic illness who are working, particularly in industries that require empathy, often do burn out. And I've experienced burnout before. I don't want to be there again. So I know the warning signs. And yeah, I think part of why I'm so passionate about talking about working with chronic illness is those developing those prevention strategies and conversations where you can sit down with your employer and you can say, your standards of efficiency or productivity are not sustainable for me to achieve. And if I continue to try meet those expectations, I'm going to burn out. And that's putting it really blatantly and
Yeah,
bluntly.
but it's the truth.
And sometimes that can get me into trouble,
Mhm.
where I speak my truth, and it's a bit scary. And then I'm like, oh, what have I just said or done? But I think sometimes you got to feel the fear and do it anyway, and you've got to
Yeah,
just show up as your whole self
yeah,
and have those hard conversations.
yeah. And how does having a disability or chronic illness and working with other disabled people, like what do you get to provide them that someone who doesn't have a chronic illness or disability may not?
Oh, I love that question. Yeah, I think it's when you're meeting someone with a sense of empathy, and you're meeting them and you're saying, I hear you, I feel you, I understand what where you're coming from. I think that can generate such beautiful conversations with people. And in my work experience across, the jobs that I've done in the industry, I've found that the most quality conversations I've had with people is when I'm saying, I've been on the other side. I've been on the side where I've had to advocate hard for my needs, and um, I've I understand, the struggle that you're experiencing. And um, I think I'm always quite transparent in my conversations with the community. And I say, the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing is because I want to build a sense of connection with the broader disability and all those amazing and diverse people within that community. Yeah.
And what's kind of like your go-to advice, I guess, for people with disability, chronic illness, whether it's navigating like the workspace or just life in general?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think showing up for yourself and listening to your body's needs and setting those boundaries is really important. So, understanding your capacity, and that can change day to day, but having a sort of ritual that's daily or weekly where you're checking in with yourself and understanding what you have to offer. I really like spoon theory, which was developed by Christine Miserandino. I hope I'm not butchering her name. But yeah, like checking in with yourself and saying, how many spoons have I got to give today? And at the end of the day, checking in with yourself and saying, I've done all of this today. I've achieved all of this. Well done. Pat yourself on the back. How many spoons have I got left to give for myself? And considering that really carefully in your day-to-day rituals, and ensuring that you're keeping some resources and energy for yourself at the end of the day.
And where are you heading off to next? Like you talk about side projects and like working on your advocacy. Is there anything particular that you're working on?
Yeah, so I run an Instagram page called the Sunflower Collective.
Mm.
And that really started as my passion project during the pandemic, sort of in between lockdowns in 2021. Um, COVID taught me a lot about navigating identity with disability. I think identifying as someone who's immunocompromised, it built it provided me with so much more information and knowledge of how to navigate this world as somebody with a disability. So I really learned a lot about myself during the lockdowns and the pandemic, and coming out of that, um, I had strong feelings, like many of us in the community, around how, the dialogue between government and public health advisors, it changed. It shifted from, let's keep everyone safe and protect the most vulnerable, to nah, everyone's going to get it. We all just have to keep carrying on and return back to quote normal. And I had strong feelings around that. And so the Sunflower Collective was really a place for me to articulate those feelings and share what I was experiencing, and connect with others who were feeling the same way or had other perspectives to offer. And so, yeah, that's an ongoing project. I work on the Sunflower Collective when I can, between full-time work and managing my health. As I said, I also am now represented by Anya, through the Champion Health Agency, and I'm excited to see what transpires through that. My sort of personal goal is to get more comfortable speaking to my own personal story and lived experience story. So I'm quite an anxious, shy person, and I prefer written form of expression. So my goal is to get more comfortable speaking to my truth.
Well, you've done great today. Can't even tell that you're
Oh,
anxious.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I've had lots of practice masking my anxiety in my work.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Lisa. Where can we find you?
Yeah, so anyone who is open and is more than welcome to find me on Instagram at the.sunflower collective. Always keen to engage with people and connect and understand other perspectives. People are also more than welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn if that's something that they use. Yeah, and that's really all my social presence for now, social media presence. That may change in the near future, but yeah, that's where people can find me for now.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. Don't forget to subscribe to get our episodes every 2 weeks and to leave a review if you are enjoying the podcast. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Sick of It Podcast and Instagram at sickofit_podcast. I'll talk to you soon.